Hi, everybody. I'm Denise Callaway, sitting in for Jan Jones. Welcome to interCHANGE. We're glad to have you with us, so let's get the discussion started. The recall rolls on. A date's been set for recall elections, including a likely recall election of Governor Scott Walker. But will we need to show our IDs to vote at the polls? Reading, writing, arithmetic, and sex education. We'll talk about a bill passed by the legislature that tells school districts if you're going to teach sex education, you have to tell kids that abstinence is the only and sure way to prevent pregnancies and STDs. Well, let's see, we've talked about politics, sex, and now religion. We'll delve into why some people are opposing plans to build a large Islamic mosque in Brookfield. And let's make a deal. What does the Milwaukee Bucks trade of Andrew Bogut to the Golden State Warriors mean for the franchise in the long term and the short term? Let's meet our panelists. Joel McNally is a longtime newspaper columnist. Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. Avi Lank, longtime business reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, now retired, and Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will have commentary at the end of the show. The recall is on again. May 8th will be a likely primary, with June 5th set for the general election. 4 Republican senators, including Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald, face recalls. The Government Accountability Board won't announce till the end of the month, but the recalls of the governor and lieutenant governor are also highly likely. So in just 3 months from now, we'll either be talking about a new governor or how Scott Walker managed to keep his job. But first, a basic question. Joel, is there really any doubt that the governor and lieutenant governor are going to be recalled?
No, I don't think so, and I don't think the Republicans think so. I don't think Scott Walker or Rebecca Clayfish think so. The amazing thing to me, though, is you know, this whole legislative session that we're wrapping up right now. It looks like the Republicans actually, you know, would like to add more fuel to the fire. I mean, why, you know, get involved in abortion again to try to get people upset, or sex education, and just stirring the pot, and, you know, a big, you know, attempted takeover of this institution we happen to be sitting in, Milwaukee Area Technical College. You know, the technical college that graduates the most African Americans. More African Americans graduate from this institution than all the other higher educational institutions in the state, and they want to turn it over to Ozaukee and Waukesha County, you know, to run this place, and perhaps to fire all of us when they take over this TV station. I mean, they just, like, they can't seem to help themselves, stirring the pot, you know, getting into controversial issues that can only continue to divide this state, and that just seems like such a silly way to go.
Well, it got really interesting today, Kevin. One of the senators scheduled to be recalled, Pam Galloway, has announced that she's going to resign effective Saturday. But the GAB says that there's still going to be a recall. Her name just won't be on the ballot. Who does this really benefit? There's not going to be an incumbent in the race.
It benefits the Democrats because if the Republicans lose their majority in the Senate, that majority was paper thin to begin with because it was a 1-vote majority, but with Dale Schultz, you never know which side of the aisle he's going to be on from one day to the next. Now it becomes 16-16, but is it really 16-16? It might be one up for the Democrats because they have Dale Schultz as a pawn. It creates, though, gridlock, major gridlock. Even though the legislative session is over with, even though they're still up there arguing right now as we speak, it's basically over with. You still have work that goes on throughout the year, and nothing, I mean nothing, will get done because of what is transpiring here. The fact that the Republicans have lost their majority, you're going to have co-chairs running the state Senate, major gridlock. Nothing will get done. Because you also have this uncertainty about the recalls. Who's going to win? Who's going to be in power? You might have a temporary shift in the state Senate to the Democrats after these recalls, but then you have half the Senate is up in November, and it could swing back to Republicans. So it's all up in the air politically, not just here in the state, but nationally. We're in uncharted waters. It's very hard to predict what's going to happen.
You know, we've talked a lot about voter ID on this program. One of the things that happened this week was another judge saying voter ID, striking down the voter ID law, and Van Hollen has now appealed that. What are we going to have to do when it comes to these the possible election in May, the recall election in June? Are we going to be using our IDs and needing our IDs to vote?
My guess is that we will, but I also get a feeling that until the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, issues a ruling on it, it won't be a final decision. So you take it to the State Court of Appeals, they might issue an injunction that would permit IDs to be used. The other side has an opportunity to file an appeal. I'm certain that they will. And then that would leave the Supreme Court to finally arbitrate that.
There's going to be major confusion.
There will be and that might be more the problem than anything else, is what should people do?
It's not going to be major confusion if people don't have to show IDs. That's the way we've always voted. The Republicans keep expecting that the state Supreme Court is going to, because it is a corrupt Republican-dominated Supreme Court, it's going to automatically throw out both of these decisions by two separate judges on constitutionality. I think it becomes very difficult. The other a really important question to me, though, also is, was Michael Besson Friedrich, the law firm that Gableman, received $100,000 in free legal services from, were they involved in drafting the photo ID law? They're involved in drafting a lot of the laws that
I think this law,
legislative attorneys draw up
the Wisconsin legislature.
They didn't do the mining bill. They didn't do the collective bargaining bill.
To read how a bill becomes a law.
The Wisconsin legislature modeled this piece of legislation around voter ID after what has already been passed by the U.S. Supreme Court as having
actually, Gerard,
as being allowable.
It's a little bit more stringent than what the Supreme Court allowed, which was one of the points that was used in deciding it didn't pass constitutional muster. Although, as I think Joel pointed out, both the decisions were based on the Wisconsin Constitution. There's some other cases working their way through the federal courts, but that's not what we're talking about now. The decisions were very strong. They were forthright. They said it would be judicial activism to allow this law to go through, because the Wisconsin Constitution is quite clear that voting is a fundamental right, much more important than buying cough syrup or getting a library card or these other things that you're going to tell me you got to do with your ID. Cough syrup isn't a right. Voting is an absolute right in this state, and that's what the court did.
Well, the legislature is still in session now, but one of the things that they did pass earlier was a measure that requires any public school which teaches sex education to teach kids that abstinence is the only sure way to prevent pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases. Some people think that's just plain common sense, but critics say doing this is like sticking your head in the sand and pretending we're back in the 50s. Kevin, is this really necessary? Don't most schools teach this now?
A bit of history. This new law was law back when Jim Doyle was governor. He actually signed it into law, but then reversed his own decision in 2010 and rescinded it. It makes sense. Abstinence always works. And what this does, it never fails. And what this does is it rightly gives local communities the opportunity to make their own decisions about their own standards and sensibilities. I would favor a comprehensive sex education, a mandate.
That's what we have.
Yeah, that's what we have now.
If it worked, but if this crass culture that we have that's been telling kids, oh, it's okay, you'll be okay if you just practice safe sex and wear a condom. If that worked, fine, it doesn't. Then explain to me why we have every year 19 million new cases of sexually transmitted diseases, with 25% of them teenagers. And the impact is devastating. Perpetual pain, infertility, chronic depression. If you're able to have kids, there's a good chance that they will suffer from birth defects, various forms of cancer, even premature death. I think we've sold our kids a bill of goods, and they're paying for it.
A couple of things. One, since we've had this regime where maybe there's been a balanced approach, the unwed pregnancy rate in the city of Milwaukee has gone down. And you can argue whether it's because you're teaching abstinence or you're teaching birth control. The point is teaching them both works. The second thing is this law says that you have to teach that abstinence is the only reliable, that's the word in the law, reliable method. And that's just plain false.
What's more reliable than kids abstaining?
It says it's the only reliable method. There are, for clinical tests of new drugs and all kinds of things, there are all kinds of medical procedures and protocols that say if you properly use birth control methods, they are, quote, reliable, which is the word that's in there. This is to tell them it's the only reliable method of birth control. It's essentially lying to these kids. We might as well tell them babies come from storks. And once you got teachers who are lying to kids about one thing that the kids know they're lying to them about, how are they supposed to have the proper respect to teach them other stuff?
And I always think it's very funny on this show when Kevin sits over there and says, abstinence never fails. Abstinence fails all the time. Children being abstinent.
You don't get pregnant from being abstinent.
But if they fail to continue, do you remember how sex worked when you were younger? And you know, sometimes things happen without being planned ahead of time because of passion and emotions and that kind of thing. That is when abstinence fails. And the problem is when with these abstinence-only classes, it has been shown through research that if these children are taught abstinence only and then that fails, they are much less likely to use a condom. They're much less likely to use safe sex when abstinence fails. And that is dangerous. That is deadly to try to scare kids out of practicing safe sex and using a condom.
But we've had a lot of communities that have made a lot of progress in terms of developing comprehensive plans that do include abstinence. Is this going to place so much emphasis on the idea of abstinence that it's going to be difficult for those comprehensive plans to really continue the way they have?
No, I don't think so. I think if left to individual communities, they'll be wise enough to know that it requires a comprehensive approach if you're going to deal effectively with especially teen pregnancies. The networks are already in place. The structures are in place so that in most communities, you already have a broad-based approach that's being taken to addressing unwanted pregnancies, so or preventing pregnancies from occurring in the first place. So I really don't think it's much more than our zeroing in on a word and trying to parse what that means. Most communities aren't going to get to that level and debate it ad infinitum.
What's this thing about middle-aged male legislators wanting to talk about sex all the time and pass laws about it?
We got nothing else to do.
Get a hobby.
There we go. Not today. Today you got a lot to do if you're a male legislator, at least if you're in the assembly.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. The Islamic Society of Milwaukee has unveiled plans to build a large mosque in Brookfield. The plans are generating some controversy. There are folks who, quite simply, don't want a Muslim place of worship in Brookfield. Is this religious bigotry, or do you see any real reason for concern, Avi?
I can't believe we're talking about this in the 21st century in the United States of America, and a community that is home to, if not the largest, one of the largest Christian congregations in the state, that has developed over the last couple of decades to a very large operation that, if you take a look on a Google Maps at it, is in the middle of a residential area. Nobody seems to be upset about that. Most of the religious leaders, as far as I know, all of the religious leaders in Brookfield think that this is a fine idea, that there's no problem with a mosque in Brookfield. And it seems to me there's no more discussion to it than that. I'm not in the business of calling anybody a bigot. I don't know what's in people's hearts. But, you know, to say that adherents of one religion are more likely to engage in certain behaviors than adherents of another religion is palpably wrong and an unfortunate way to think.
Would we even be having this conversation if we were talking about a church or a synagogue that was going into that location?
No, I don't think so. And there have been some comparisons to the mosque that's planned near 911, and that's just not even close. Not even close.
And there wasn't any real controversy.
Right. I mean, there wasn't a problem with that either, really.
That's debatable. But in this case, I commend the parties involved for trying to focus the attention away from religious issues. You do have to consider the voice of the people. And if you're going to do that, fine, but let's keep the debate centered around construction issues, traffic issues, zoning issues. Those are pertinent items and factors that I think the locals have to take into consideration when they're making this decision.
And we've actually had, I mean, it's nothing new as far as I know in this sense. When it's restricted to those things like zoning, you get issues in some neighborhoods around parking, whether or not there are going to be disruptions in the neighborhood because of late hour meetings and the like, or what type of community benefit derives from having some of these mega churches, which is where there's been a lot of controversy.
And those are legitimate. I don't think the fear of terrorism invading the Brookfield borders is legitimate.
There's been an issue, though, around whether the mosque in and of itself is problematic or whether the leadership of the mosque is problematic. Well, and that's where some of the controversy.
But you know what?
There were some issues there.
Let me say
that's not Brookfield's deal.
I actually thought when this discussion started we were all kind of on the same page. But
I think we are.
I thought we were. But let me say this. Mm-hmm. Every time there's been a racial controversy, a religious controversy, no one ever talks about race or religion. They talk about zoning or traffic or, some cover story.
Those are local issues that the Pauls have to consider.
Covering up the bigotry. And maybe I'm not as nice as Avi, but I actually think this area has been very supportive. The religious leaders have been very supportive. Mm-hmm. The political leaders have been very supportive. There's one group that I know of that's trying to stir up trouble around this. It's the right-wing Eagle Forum, which is an archaic organization that has raised hate issues on all kinds of subjects. And I don't think they represent the people in Brookfield. I don't think they represent the leadership. But I just refuse to say, well, as long as they only talk about the zoning or the traffic, because those are covers for all kinds of crap.
There is another thing to be said in that. There was a federal law passed a couple of years ago that was pretty adamant in that you can't use zoning and stuff like that as a cover to stop this kind of stuff. And there have been Supreme Court cases that have tested it. I'm just amazed we're having the discussion.
We're not. Well, we're not. I think
but that it's a topic that we even brought up.
I think the media promoted it. I think they went to the Eagle Forum, and I think they're looking for the opponents, and that happens over and over.
Not everybody is racist, Joel.
There have been a number of African American mega churches that have faced zoning difficulties right in our own community and getting permits to construct these churches in neighborhoods that tended to be African American neighborhoods. So I don't see that aspect of it as being unusual. What is unusual about this particular case is that, and you may be right, it might be this Eagle Forum that's delved into the background of the leadership, and they have created the controversy.
And the media's helped.
Well, when inflammatory statements are made,
they go
we all know that makes for great soundbite.
Right.
Well, let's talk about a little basketball. When he's healthy, Andrew Bogut is one of the best players in the NBA, but quite often he wasn't healthy. Still, some people were pretty surprised when the Bucks traded Bogut to Golden State this week for sharpshooting guard Monto Ellis. Does this really help the Bucks make the playoffs yet this year? I mean, they're third in the Central. They don't have, we're not even at 500.
Mister, I never say anything bad about a local sports team.
They've got focus now. As opposed to having a player that is more on the bench than not, and having a team that has to kind of gel around that player, you've now got players that are healthy, two of them at least, two that can contribute and help make this a faster team, a more focused team. This is the kind of team that Skiles likes to coach. I think it'll make all the difference in the world in making them a lot more competitive in the next few weeks.
When you have a ball player who is borderline superstar, you want to hang on to that person. You don't want to let him go. You don't want to trade him.
That's why Golden State's saying now.
And he is, Denise, you're absolutely right on that. Bogut is tremendous when he's healthy.
Right.
He's never healthy.
Right.
And I think the Bucks were right to question his long-term durability. Now, can Brandon Jennings play alongside Ellis? I think they can be compatible, even though there's only one basketball. And I don't think the Bucks are done yet. I think they're still going to make some moves that will improve the team. But then you've got to hold on to Ellis, because if he goes after next year, then what did you get for Bogut?
You got to hold on to both Brandon and Ellis.
Well, I think because you got rid of Bogut, you definitely hang on to Jennings.
There's something else you got to do. You got to figure out what's going to happen to the Bradley Center, which, if you're talking about the long-term viability of this team, is probably a much more important
refurbish
issue.
it. And that's it.
You know,
none of us want to build a new one here.
Well, but and I will.
You have to watch the show more often.
No, I will tell you that this is to cover up my appalling lack of knowledge about the NBA. But if you would like to talk about college hockey, we can have a very long discussion. Watch out for the teams from Boston and Minnesota this year.
Let me
the
say
playoffs are on.
Let me say this about Andrew Bogut. I really liked Andrew Bogut, and I thought he brought a lot of spirit to the team. The fact that he funds the whole cheering section for the Bucks, that waves all the flags from every country, including Wisconsin, that's now represented on the team, and it's a lot of different countries, as a matter of fact, and creates a lot of spirit in that arena. I think he's been a great addition. At the same time, boy, is Ellis a great addition. Right. And right now, the press out in San Francisco area is saying, we're getting two players that don't play.
It was a strange move.
And we gave up our best player.
Not only there, but the national sports, the national conventional wisdom among sports writers around the nation is that, wow, Golden State really got screwed.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is the Bucks, sad to say, this year have been a mediocre team, which you could not depend on.
They'd be in the playoffs today.
And Ellis's addition does make it a more exciting team, and it's going to really be a shot in the arm for the rest of the season and probably into the playoffs.
Plus, you add by subtraction. You got rid of Steven Jackson, who was a cancerous form on this team that didn't get along with the coach and didn't fit in with our system, and now he's gone.
You know, one of the things that's interesting is that this also has the potential to be not only that good short-term move to energize the team, but real quickly, does that have the potential to really pay off for us on the long term as well?
If it works out and this team develops into what we think it can develop into with those two guys, those two guards, and boy, Ilyasova is coming on so strong right now.
He's playing out of his mind.
And Drew Gooden, we've got a team I'm excited about seeing, and I really do think that we can keep Ellis here, and this could be our future.
Keep Ellis here. Kwame Brown, who was part of the trade, he'll be okay short term, but I think they're going to make a move and get rid of him and get another big man.
The young guy at center is developing and may be a real plus too.
Yep.
You mean our Wisconsin guy? Lure?
No, I'm not talking about Lure. I'm talking about the guy we got in the trade. Along with Ellis.
I'm not even going to try. I'm not even going to try.
Udu.
Well, let's turn back to politics for a moment. You know, the most important election battles don't always take place at the ballot box. Some of them take place in legislative chambers and courtrooms. But writing consultant and commentator Rick Horowitz has been keeping an eye on all the action, and he's just a little bit suspicious. Rick?
Here's one to think about. If they've got the better candidates, and they say they do, and if they've got the better policies, and they say they do, then why are Republicans so afraid of a fair fight? That's right, a fair fight. You know, where every American who's eligible to vote is allowed to vote, where they don't throw up roadblocks in front of certain kinds of Americans, the kinds of Americans who tend to vote for the other guys, for the Democrats. Here we go again. Voter ID laws in Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, Texas, Wisconsin, the very heart of the Deep South. Lots of places. They're the latest Republican election manipulation tactic, trying to put a thumb, well, actually a great big elephant paw, on the scales of democracy. They say they need the new laws to prevent voter fraud, and they're not even a little bit embarrassed when the experts point out that voter fraud in this country is pretty much non-existent, 0.000 something non-existent. And not only that, but that whatever tiny amount of voter fraud there is, these new laws would do almost nothing to stop it. Like I said, not even a little bit embarrassed. When excuse number one falls flat, they just trot out excuse number two. It's about having confidence in the electoral system. There may not be any voter fraud to speak of, they say, but if the American people are worried about voter fraud, and why, I wonder, would they suddenly be worried? That's reason enough to toughen up the rules, right? Hey, if I'm worried about Martians casting write-in ballots, should we put disintegration rays on top of every schoolhouse? I don't know about you, but a system that makes it harder for no good reason, for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to vote, now that's a system not to have confidence in. And keeping people away from the polls to try to hold on to your own power, that's not a good reason. It's not even a new reason. It's been going on for years, decades really. It's a little more subtle now than it used to be, but it's really no different. And pretending otherwise, well, let's just call it a confidence game.
Favorite city.
Thanks, Rick, and thank you for joining us. Dan Jones is back in this chair next week. I'm back in my chair, and we hope you'll be back with us for another week of Interchange. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.